Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Panic Attack coaching channel. My name's Tom and I'm your Panic Attack coach, and in this video we're going to be talking all about fear. Now you're probably sat here thinking, I know fear pretty well. In fact, I know fear too well, and to some extent that is absolutely true. I've experienced plenty of fear in my life and I don't really want much more. However, fear is important to understand because fear forms a crucial part of panic attacks. And to distinguish fear from panic is really important. And I think, especially in the West, the word fear gets thrown around a lot. And there are a lot of books that say things like, fear must be defeated. We must overcome fear. Fear is our enemy. And actually, I'm not sure that's correct, and I think if fear was a person, I'd feel a bit sorry for them. Because actually, fear is purely a mechanism that exists in our bodies to help protect us. And it means well, it wants to keep us safe. And I think it's quite harsh to say that fear is something we should overcome, because actually, without fear, first of all, we would never have ever even evolved into humans, but we would also be pretty at risk in life-threatening situations. So hopefully this video is going to help change potentially your opinion on fear, your perspective, and hopefully this will give you some good background for the videos that come. So I think to understand fear, we need to go back a bit. When I say a bit, I mean a few billions of years. So as life on Earth evolved, the life forms which were best adapted survived. And the life forms that could evade threat survived. If you could escape a dangerous situation, you're more likely to survive and reproduce. So the way that organisms evolved to evade these threats was through something that's called the fear response. And the fear response is something that we're going to talk about a lot. So the fear response is just the mechanical response within the body to a threatening situation. So in early life forms, what this meant was, we're talking like single-celled organisms, a bacterium would be in an environment that wasn't quite right. It was too hot, too cold, not enough food, potentially dangerous, and it would have the ability to move slowly to a place which was more suitable, better environment. So as life forms became more sophisticated, the ways in which these creatures could respond to dangerous situations became more and more sophisticated. So by the time you get into like animals, they could respond to threats in many different ways: run away, fly away, play dead, attack. And all of these things were kind of hardwired into their physiology. Because the thing with threats is the quicker you can respond and the more effectively you can respond, the better chances you have to survive. So this fear response was absolutely crucial in keeping animals alive. And this response evolved with animals because the animals that had a better fear response were more likely to survive. So if you fast forward millions of years to the ancient ancestors of the human, like the Homo sapien, what you'll find is this fear response evolved into something which is quite amazing. And it's really like the pinnacle of biological engineering. The way that the fear response in humans has evolved is incredible. And I think it's worth appreciating because without it, we wouldn't even be here as humans. So what is the fear response? So when our brains detect a potential threat, it triggers the fear response. And crucially, it triggers the release of stress chemicals. And the one we're going to talk about, and the one we're always going to refer to, is adrenaline. So adrenaline is a chemical messenger. It's released and it travels through all of our body, and it tells our body and our mind there is a potential threat. Now, it's not intelligent. It doesn't know what it is or why. All it knows is something's not right, we need to prepare. So, like a good evolutionary system, the faster it can prepare and the stronger it can react, the better, because it allows us to react much quicker. So let's pretend we were walking in the woods and we came across a bear. So in a split second, we want to be able to think clearly, make sensible decisions, and respond effectively to this threat. Maybe we're going to run away. Now, this isn't an explanation of what you should do in a bear attack, because I know there's different rules for black and brown bears. We're not going to go into that, but let's just say the options are you can run, you can fight, which probably wouldn't be my preference, or you can stand completely still and hope that it doesn't notice you. So this response is what everyone talks about. This is like the fight, flee, freeze, fight or flight, that response. So this is the response to help keep us alive, and this is the fear response. So as soon as we detect that bear, we see the bear, in our brains it says there's a threat, our fear response is triggered, adrenaline surges through our bodies and prepares us to either run, fight, or stay very still. So the effects of adrenaline are amazing. It goes across all of our body and it has very predictable effects. Adrenaline in me does the same things as adrenaline in you and adrenaline in every other person. If I injected adrenaline into you, which would be very cruel considering your experience with panic attacks, if I did that, I could predict exactly what would happen, because it's been the blueprints there for millions of years. So what would happen? So your adrenaline would increase in your blood and it would start going to different organs to prepare you to be at your strongest. So in the heart, it's going to go there and say, look, we need to beat faster and harder. We need to pump blood to our muscles, to our brain. We need all of that oxygen to help our muscles perform at their peak. We want to send blood to our brain because we want to think clearly. We need to make split-second decisions, which are going to be the difference between life and death. So our heart beats faster and it beats harder. Completely predictable. What else is it going to do? Well, we want to make sure we have enough oxygen in our blood to start with. So what's adrenaline going to do? It's going to go to our lungs. It's going to open up our airways to maximize the amount of oxygen we can get in. Might even make us breathe a little bit quicker. Let's get as much oxygen as possible. Oxygen goes to our muscles, helps us fight or run. So when we use our muscles, we also build up what's called lactic acid and also carbon dioxide. And breathing quicker helps us get rid of that carbon dioxide as well. So the effects of adrenaline, so far we've talked about heart beating faster and harder, and that incidentally is why our blood pressure goes up, and our lungs are working harder to get as much oxygen in as possible. So there are a couple of really big ways adrenaline works. Adrenaline also affects our skin. So when we're about to fight or run, we don't want to overheat. We want to maximize heat loss. So adrenaline helps us sweat more, and it helps us divert some of our blood to our skin. This means that more heat is lost, I think, through convection, potentially. I can't remember, but more heat is lost through this process, and sweating through evaporation helps heat loss as well. So far, what we've identified are a few of the reasons that some of the sensations of fear arise. We now know why our heart feels like it's pounding. We know why we're breathing a bit too quickly. We know why our skin is a bit clammy. We're flushed. Also, adrenaline diverts blood to our muscles, which we talked about already. And by doing so, it moves blood away from our digestive systems, which makes sense if you think about it. I don't think it's important if you're faced with a bear that you're digesting your lunch. I think that can wait until you're out of that situation. So the movement of blood away from the stomach can actually make you feel a bit sick, a bit empty in the gut, and that's completely normal. Not something to worry about. So the fear response is this powerful mechanism to help prepare the body to be at its optimum. It's not something to be afraid of. In fact, it's something that's absolutely fantastic. And if you were ever in one of these life or death situations, it could genuinely be the difference between survival or not surviving. So the fear response is actually good. And another reason that it's good is because when we're feeling fear, it really heightens our awareness. As blood goes to our brain, it makes us alert and it makes us be able to make really quick decisions. So if that bear starts running to us, we can quickly work out, is this tree climbable? How am I going to do it? Is it worth doing, or should I do something else? And this decision making is also really important, and this can make you feel quite alert when the fear response is happening. And the fear response is extremely powerful, and one of the ways it's also beneficial is it helps to identify the things that we value in our lives. So when we're feeling fear, we can kind of sense that there's something that matters to us. Now, obviously, the most basic is our survival, but it's also things that we care about. So overall, fear is fantastic at keeping us safe and showing us the things that we care about the most. So our fear response is a very normal process and something that it's not something to be afraid of, and it's not something we would want to do without, because when we really need it, it would be there for us. Now, modern humans, especially those of us living in the West, we don't encounter bears very often, especially living in the UK. In fact, we don't really come across these life or death situations very often at all, which is great. Our ancestors, a few 100,000 years ago, would have encountered predators and neighbouring tribes who wanted to fight them often. So their fear response was particularly valuable because it was used so often to help them survive. For us, we can live day to day without ever really needing it. Doesn't mean it's not important, because it's there if we do need it, but largely it's not something that we rely on. Now, an analogy I often use for the fear response is the smoke alarm analogy. If we're in the kitchen, if there's a fire and the smoke alarm goes off, that's great because it alerts us to a danger. However, what we can find is that sometimes a smoke alarm can go off a little bit too easily, and you might check it and there's not even any smoke, it's just oversensitive, and that's not very helpful because it alerts us that there's a potential fire, and then we go down, there's not actually one. But we want it to be sensitive because if there was a tiny bit of smoke, we want to detect it, because we don't want to come down too late and then we're in all sorts of trouble. So we want our smoke alarms to be sensitive, but only sensitive to smoke and only go off appropriately. And I think most of us have experienced situations where the smoke alarms go off when they shouldn't. Really annoying. Often it's because the battery needs changing. But what I want you to imagine is the fear response is like the smoke alarm. So normally there needs to be fire before the smoke alarm goes off. Similarly with our fear response, there needs to be a threat. However, sometimes our smoke alarm or our fear response can go off a little bit too easily, even when there's not a threat. Now, using the analogy of the bear in the woods, if we heard those bushes rustle but nothing came out, or it was the wind or just a bird, we might have triggered our fear response, and we might start feeling like we're gearing up to fight, and there's not actually a bear there. That would have been an inappropriate fear response. However, it's better to be too sensitive than not sensitive at all, because if that was a bear in that bush, you'd be happy to be ready for it. And if it was a bird, normally you think, whew, I'm glad that wasn't anything serious. It gives you a bit of a heart in the mouth feeling, and then it passes. So that's an example where our fear response is kind of a little bit too sensitive. But what can happen is our fear response can be really sensitive. So even the slightest thing can set it off. And this can become a problem when it becomes increasingly sensitive. And what we're going to find out when we talk about panic attacks soon is that our fear response becomes hypersensitive. So when there's no signs of threat, bang, our fear response is activated, and we get all of the effects of adrenaline without wanting them whatsoever. And this is kind of the basis of what leads to panic attacks. So hopefully you found this interesting. The fear response is fascinating. I encourage you to read more about it. Fear itself is not something that you need to be afraid of. It's completely normal. It's not good or, I mean, it is good if you need it, but it's not in itself good or bad. It's just a simple mechanism for keeping us safe. And without it, we wouldn't even be here today. And if you really needed it, it would save your life. So I think fear has a lot of bad press, and hopefully this has given you some insight into why it's not in itself a bad thing. So in the next video, we're going to look at panic and how this fear response contributes to panic attacks. So I look forward to seeing you then. If you enjoyed this video, please do drop me a like, share it with anyone you think it's helpful for. And if you've got any questions or comments, please drop them below the video. It'd be really interesting to hear from you, and I'll respond to all of them. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.